a minute.
Okay.
This is the Edition Unfiltered podcast.
I've come to know and understand that every voice is a unique blend of cultures, backgrounds, and experiences. And what I'd like to do in this episode is talk about the elephant in the room, or the accent in the room. Let's talk about my accent. I'm sure many of you have wondered why I sound the way I sound, and then coming up with your own versions and assumptions. So I'm going to put it all out there, put my stuff on the table, and just explain to you what it is. And if you'd like, have a seat and take away what's on the table. Wow. I can't believe I just came up with that. So sometimes I feel like I could be the chameleon of accents because I have a mix of British, I have a mix of Kenyan and American. It's like my accent is an amalgamation of all the flavors, a smoothie, if you will, actually, just blended perfectly with all these different flavors in there. You see, I was born and raised in Kenya, and I've lived in Kenya for 20 years, but for some strange reason, I don't have a Kenyan accent, not even a hint of it. So if you're wondering and you don't know what a Kenyan accent sounds like, I would suggest you Google it. Or if not, better yet, I have 3 people who are also from Kenya who have variations of the accent. I have Sid, Naili, and Meshvi that have been with me on the previous podcast episodes. So if you're interested, go ahead and listen. But yeah, I don't know where I've gotten it from. And the thing is, my dad doesn't have this accent, and he was born and raised in Kenya, and he's lived in Kenya for half a century. My grandfather doesn't have this accent either, and he was born and raised in Kenya as well, and he still lives, and he's 79. So I speak like this, obviously. My dad speaks, if I were to say what he sounds like, I would think he sounds like 0.1% the way I do. He doesn't have the complete Kenyan accent. He has hints of British in there as well. And my grandfather has a mix of Kenyan and British, but he sounds more Kenyan than the 3 of us do. My sister, she had a full-blown Kenyan accent, and she no longer does, because we moved to the States when she was 12 and now she's about to be 18. So it's completely understandable to assume how her experiences and her background and her culture here has completely changed the way that she speaks. But I have this, I think it's delightful, mixture of British, Kenyan, and American accent. If I was to use an example, like I said, a smoothie with a splash of this, a pinch of that, and a whole lot of what the heck just happened. And to decipher or to answer the question, what the heck just happened? I feel like we need to really go back into my past and figure out what and where this changed. So let's go down that path. And you might think, having a unique accent is a good thing. Well, yeah, I mean, you'd be half right. I really like the way that I speak. I mean, if I didn't, I wouldn't be hosting a podcast, right? I'd have to really like the way I sound for me to host a podcast and then listen to my own voice and edit it. I mean, can you imagine if I didn't like the way I spoke? Anyway, now that we've established how much I really like the way I sound, the other half of it is really complicated. It's complex because my accent has been the subject of a lot of, I wouldn't say bullying, but a lot of accusations that I'm faking the way that I speak or that I'm trying to be something that I'm not. And I completely understand because I kind of polarized classmates because half of them thought I had a British accent and the other half thought I had an American accent. And so it was really troubling, not just for them, but for me too, because I was really confused of what I sounded like. And now that I think about it, it's completely understandable why they thought that I was faking it or trying to be something that I'm not, because I didn't sound like everyone else. And so the most safest assumption is that I'm faking it because I'm not from Britain and I'm not from America. So what's going on? Where the hell did this come from? I didn't think about this then, but now we're going to take a step back. Or better yet, I think let's go back 20 years, which is as far as I can remember, the first memory I have of me speaking. And the first memory I have of anyone talking about the way that I speak. Let's put a pause on going back figuratively, but let's go back in someone else's words, if that makes sense. I was told when I was like 15 or 16 that when I was between the ages of 1 and 5, I never spoke English I only spoke Gujarati and Swahili. Gujarati is my mother tongue and it is an Indian dialect, and Swahili is the national language in Kenya. And so I only spoke those two when I was in that age range. And when I was 5, I was put into year 1, which is first grade. And everyone around my mom, particularly her friends or my classmates' mothers, would be like, how are you putting her in this grade right now when she doesn't even know how to speak English, because all she speaks is Swahili and Gujarati. Who is she going to speak English to? Now, that was a really stupid question to ask because my dad predominantly speaks English to his dad. And so it was really weird how they asked that question. And here is where I've kind of put two puzzle pieces together. So I didn't speak English before the age of 5, and I started speaking after the age of 5. And obviously at that age, I had a lot of learning to do because I was essentially learning another language so late I wouldn't say so late, but later than usual. And so I learned how to talk English specifically from my cousins, particularly 3 of them who were from the UK, and my aunt and uncle who were also from the UK. And all of these 5 people had a mix of British and Kenyan, and more so British English. And my cousins, whenever they'd come down to visit, I would spend most of the time that they had here with them. I was so fascinated by the way they spoke. I would sit and listen to them for hours. They were honestly my idols. I look up to them and I still look up to them. I always wanted to be like them. I think in some ways I am because they've made such a huge impression on me and they did have some influence, especially at such a young age. And my aunt and uncle were just always in Kenya, and being an Indian family, we basically saw each other 5 out of the 7 days of the week. If not 5, 3, at least 3 of the 7 days of the week. And they had a big imprint on the way that I spoke too. So now that we've figured out where the British part of my accent came from, let's talk about where the American side of the accent came from. This is obviously prior to me moving to the States. I don't understand where I got the American accent from. The only influence that I had of anybody remotely sounding American was when I watched TV shows and when I watched movies, and that really came later on in my life when we had the internet and we had these illegal sites that we could go and watch TV. This is obviously pre-Netflix, Hulu streaming service era. So I don't know, because if I take that into consideration, then I should have had the American accent after I was a teenager, so when I was around 17. But by that time, it would be really stupid. But I actually spoke this way even before. So the American part of it remains a mystery to me. And so you might be thinking, okay, fine, then you probably just had the British accent and a Kenyan accent. And that's probably why people were confused. I would say that's probably safe to assume. But when I had cousins coming in from the UK, now this is when I'm obviously a teenager in my mid-teens, 16, ranging between 16 and 18. I had cousins from America and I had cousins from the UK come down. These are cousins I've never met before. And the ones that came down from the UK said I had an American accent, and they were wondering how I had the American accent. And the ones that came down from America said I had the British accent. And well, they weren't wondering where I got the British accent from, because it was quite evident that a lot of the people around me also had a variant of the British accent in them. But the American one has remained a mystery. I've tried going back in time. I've tried figuring out what influence there was in my life at that time that caused me to have this accent, and I've come short of it. I have no freaking idea where. But let's fast forward to now. I'm living in America. I've been living here for 6 years. Oh my God, I miss home. And my accent has definitely become a lot more complex than I would want it to be. And I think that in part is something that I can articulate because I remember distinctly the way I sounded before I came to the States to live here and the way I sound now. And I can tell you that there's a change. I think my accent has evolved. I think it's adapted. Not evolved. I'm going to use the word adapted to the way people speak here. My cousins here, when I first moved, I would say things like, I'm not going to talk to you. Now I say things like, I'm not going to talk to you. You can hear the difference there. And when I'd say the things like the booth of the car, or I just or the way that I just generally spoke, my cousins would obviously make fun of me. I've actually even had other people make fun of me. Well, I wouldn't say make fun of me, but laugh at the way that I sound. So I bought these. Let's digress for a second. I bought these shoes from Nike and they turned out to be a size bigger. So I went to return it to the UPS store and I gave him the return label. I gave him the box and he asked me, "Where is this going?" And I said, "Oh, it's being shipped to Nike." And he's like, "I'm sorry, what?" And I said, "Nike, the shoes." And he's like, "Do you mean Nike?" And I was like, "Yeah, I guess that's what I mean." And then there was a co-worker there as well. And so they looked at each other and started laughing. And he's like, "I'm sorry, we've just never heard anyone say it the way you have." And at that moment, I guess I didn't feel, I wouldn't say embarrassed, but I felt silly because clearly I knew that this is the way that I've known to say it and I said it right. But since the other two had no exposure to anything else other than the way that it is said here, they thought I was the one that was foolish. But yeah, so sometimes I'll say Nike, sometimes I'll say Nike, which is why I say my accent has adapted. When I'm speaking to people from the States, my accent becomes very different to when I'm speaking to my sister or my dad or my mom or anyone else from anywhere else. It's not the same. And here's where I actually mean and believe that if I was a chameleon, I would be a chameleon of accents, because my accent changes depending on who I'm talking to. Not just my accent, but my voice changes too. And I've noticed this. I become more American and I still have words that I refuse to say differently. Like, I will never say water, I'll say water. That's one thing. First of all, I love the way that I say that word. Secondly, it just sounds better like that. That's just how it's supposed to be. I'm never gonna say aluminum. I'm gonna say aluminium. I'm never gonna say, no, I'm sorry. I'm never going to say trunk. I'm going to say booth. There's just a lot of things that I'm not going to say the way that it's said here, but in terms of just not the way I say the words, but the speaking, the voice, the rhythm of the way the words come out of my mouth changes. I think rhythm is more accurate. But when I'm talking to my sister, I think it becomes more primal. It becomes more of the way I sounded back home. If I speak to my friends as well from back home, it sounds a lot like it did back home. So chameleon, shapeshifter, whatever it is, but I definitely think that I've become really good at adapting to who I'm speaking to. So now when I'm saying words differently every time that I speak and somebody asks me, "Why are you changing your accent? What are you changing your accent for? Trying to fit in?" My response is no. I grew up in a multilingual country. I speak more than one language. I learned to speak English in different parts of the world, and therefore my accent can change on its own. Thank you, Sindhuvi, for that one. So, in conclusion, now that we've established that I have a lot of cousins, all of who have influenced me in some sort of way, we can get to the main point, which is my accent is a very funny thing. It's a mixture of cultures, experiences, influences, and it's honestly a reminder that we're all really unique and our accents really reflect who we are and where we come from and the experiences we've had. So embrace your accent, embrace the quirks, embrace your individuality. I just had to add that in there because, after all, variety is the spice of life and our accents are the perfect seasoning.